Nick Selby has worked in law enforcement and security consulting for many years. He's seen the good and bad aspects of those fields. Nick strives to help people understand the complexities of law enforcement and information security.
Every year, 1,400 people die after an encounter with police. There are 80 million encounters in the United States between police and citizens. And every year, 1,400 people end up dead. Some of them are unarmed, usually about 150 to 200. The rest of them are either armed or something. Even the the Washington Post says that 92% of the people who were killed by police had initiated a deadly force encounter. But that every cop knows that if you shoot somebody, you're going to absolutely get investigated. You probably are going to be the subject of a federal civil rights lawsuit. It's going to be a nightmare for years and years. Actually, non-deadly force is the problem. The slap, the kick, the punch, the humiliation, the ordering people to do stuff that is unfair, talking to people rudely. These are the things that destroy trust in law enforcement of the community. And there's no data anywhere in the world, anywhere, about that.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Plutopia News Network podcast. I'm John Lepkowski, and my partners here today are Scoop Sweeney and Wendy Grossman. We are the co-hosts, and our guest today is Nick Selby, who is an information and physical security professional. And he has a company called Fuzz Technology that provides information security, disaster, cyber incident readiness assessments, and they're a subsidiary of EPSD Incorporated. So here we are.
Well, Nick and I met in 2000 or 2001 when we were both recruited to work for a company called Tornado Insider, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And this was a startup in Amsterdam that was going to, they spent a lot of their seed money building a stock market index of high-tech companies and stuff. And so they were paying extraordinarily well for journalists, and they collected us all in Amsterdam to admire their in-office bartender and explain to us that the company was going to do all this great stuff, and it had its own index, and then in a couple of years it was going to go public. And at that moment I thought, yeah, that didn't work for Wired. So I started calculating how long I thought the money was going to last, and I figured 6 months, and I planned accordingly. Nick made it actually quite a bit longer than I did, I think. But anyway, since then, I've gone on being a journalist, and Nick has worked all kinds of jobs. And I think we should start with Nick explaining his resume, because it's really fascinating.
If you look at my resume, it's absolutely bizarre. And from my perspective, it's always taking a complex thing and telling a simple story about it. And so, like, before I was a journalist, I wrote for Lonely Planet, writing travel guides for Lonely Planet on crazy places. Like, I really wanted to only write about crazy places. So I worked on the first post-Soviet Russia book for Lonely Planet. I did the Brazil guide. I did Texas, which is kind of crazy. But I've also, when I was with Tornado and we worked together, Wendy, like, I was introduced to and really thrown deeply into the innovation culture in Scandinavia, especially around mobile telephony. I am as bad as predicting as David Rakoff. So, for example, my first reaction when somebody showed me a camera on a mobile phone was, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. I will never use that." I try not to make predictions anymore, but the work that was being done there in 2000, 2001 was really the stuff that we have in all of our devices today, the groundwork and the foundations of it. And it was really interesting to see that. I can't remember what they called it. It was something cool. It wasn't Silicon Alley, but it was like, some kind of cool name riff on Silicon Valley. And that got me very much into, once again, I had worked in physical security in Russia, as I was there actually during the coup, with Yeltsin on a tank. And then as that devolved into what became the Russian Federation in that first couple of years, when it was just absolute chaos there, I was working in physical security. Seeing this innovation in Scandinavia really got me back into the cybersecurity, which I don't think it was called that then, the cybersecurity thing, because I find both sides of this absolutely fascinating. I think that the creativity shown by criminals who are looking to get around controls is really quite exciting, and the defense, the blue team against that is also really fascinating. And that started my tech journey in the world of information security. I worked at a company called 451 Research, which is now Standard & Poor's Global Intelligence. I established the information security practice there, and then I became the VP of Research Operations. So there were, 35 analysts or something covering all of enterprise information technology. And I've worked as an incident responder to nation state attacks, going into very large places that have been attacked by the Russians, the Chinese, and trying to help them understand what had happened, fix things very quickly come up with a recovery architecture, an immediate term. Here's how we keep the lights on and send out our accounts receivable, and here's the blueprint for the next guys who are going to come in and stabilize you for the long term. These days, what I do is I spend a lot of time doing IT transformation similar to that, but on a less insane timeline, where we look at the issues of companies that have been hacked, or companies that are having problems with technical debt, having problems with engineering efficiency. How can you change it? It's almost always not an engineering problem. It's almost always a cultural problem, a communications problem. And that's what I'm really fascinated by these days is how organizations communicate internally, and how that is reflected in the engineering processes and ultimately the products that they make.
When were you a cop in Texas? Because I know that's in your resume too.
It is. And I'm weirdly, technically, I'm still a cop in Texas. I am a reserve officer. So I volunteer in my law enforcement retirement. In 2010, being sick of going to the police and having them say, huh? When I said, hey, I need help because somebody's been hacked. How hard could it be? I said, I should go to the police academy and just see if I can help out. So I did. And I learned why it was so hard. I worked my way up quickly from volunteer reservist to paid detective, mainly working on child sexual abuse material and cyber crimes. And I did a lot of work on intelligence gathering for law enforcement, and that led to my job at the New York City Police Department as the director of cyber intelligence and investigations for the NYPD. What I was doing there mainly ended up working in the Intelligence Bureau, which protects New York against terrorist threats, but it also acts as kind of an innovation hub within the department. And what I was working on was the still very difficult to solve problem. How do non-federal law enforcement officers handle cyber crime? Not when people break into your network, not cyber native crimes, right? The things that I hack into your Bitcoin wallet and transfer your Bitcoin to my wallet, and then I move it someplace. That's entirely in the cyber domain. But the kinds of things that really victimize people on a broad scale. Hey, ma'am, I'm the lawyer for your son. He's in jail in Texas. He was in a car accident and he killed a woman, and the child is in the hospital. You need to send $15,000 right now for his bail, right? Those kinds of scams that are hundreds of years old, that have just been empowered by the internet. How does the NYPD respond to that? How do you investigate that? And that's what I worked on my time there. And then I went back into the private sector.
It's funny that you should mention that, because that's sort of the thinking that was the impetus for creating the Electronic Frontier Foundation, if you're familiar with them.
Absolutely.
Was the understanding that the police in sort of at any level in law enforcement, that they didn't really understand technology enough to understand what they were dealing with when they were dealing with cybercrime. Mm-hmm. And for our branch of the Electronic Frontier Foundation here in Austin, Bruce Sterling, who is a science fiction writer, but was also part of our EFF group here, EFF Austin, and he actually went down to the police department and started hanging out with the police and talking to them about technology. Mm-hmm. And I hope, and I'm kind of wondering about this, over the years, you have organizations like EFF who are at least at some point concerned with that problem, and
Yep.
and others have been concerned with that problem. How well is law enforcement has become hip about technology now?
It's terrible, and it remains terrible for a number of cultural reasons, some of which um, are understandable. Again, these are actually not technical problems. These are political and cultural problems. I'll give you one example. When I was in the police academy, I recognized that since I was going to be a cop on patrol, I wanted a camera. I wanted a body cam. Now, this was before body cams were widely available. I bought it with my own money. It was like $800. But I had that damn thing on my shirt, and I was able to record the things that I did, and I still strongly support body cameras. What people don't understand about body cameras is, if you take a look at back in 2017 is the last time I looked at the actual statistic. It is very true that prosecutors use body camera footage to go after police malfeasance. It's true, 8% of the time. Right. So everybody wants to hang these body cameras on cops to get a sense of how these cops are not doing their job. And what they ended up with is 92% of the time, those body camera videos prosecute somebody in the community. That was not what people expected. That was not what people were sold. So there's a lot of cultural impetus to get technology. Usually it's something promised to be the cure for whatever thing is in the news, right? Drunk driving or police malfeasance. We're just going to do this and then it'll be solved. It never is. It's always the overpromise and underdeliver of technology. And the response usually from law enforcement is they've been burned again. And now they distrust the people who are suggesting these things. And people see the police reticence to argue. The new one, I guess, that we can talk about is facial recognition. I can talk to you about 16 ways that it's really, really great and 16 ways where it's absolutely terrifying. Most talking points, most people who are talking about things like facial recognition, things like open source intelligence tools for law enforcement, they're not, most Americans anyway get their training about law enforcement from television shows. So they don't actually, they feel like they understand how it works, but they truly don't. And most cops feel really distrusted, often for very good reasons. Police lie, but there's a real chasm between the people who are trying to have this conversation, the motives, and what each side is hearing the other one say. These kinds of cultural things stand in the way of widespread technology adoption. And this is aggravated by organizations like ACLU, not to just pick on them, but like one of the things that they said about body video was, well, we should not save any of those recordings. I'm like, well, what other inculpatory or exculpatory evidence should we also throw out? Because I can think of a lot of people who've been released from prison after doing a DNA test on the underwear of a rape victim and a murder victim from 1989, and now they are free because it was a huge injustice, because we saved the evidence and we never throw it away. But you're saying that this is a new class of evidence that should be thrown away. I don't think you've thought this through. And these kinds of technical debates almost never happen. It's usually just the talking points winning.
You know, that's really interesting, because I've been around a lot of privacy people, and I do remember when DNA sampling came out, it was a big issue here in Britain. Yeah. There was a big case which was eventually decided by the European Court on Human Rights and found against the UK, because the police were collecting DNA samples from suspects and keeping them even if the people were innocent.
Yes.
And so that was that case is really significant in a way, because that's kind of the beginning of the Conservative Party's desire to exit the European Convention of Human Rights, exit the court rather than accept the ruling and say, well, maybe we're doing the wrong thing. So, and everybody I know is really upset about the Metropolitan Police in London setting up, without any public debate or any consultation, deciding they're going to set up a live facial recognition system in front of Oxford Circus Station, which is that's like Times Square, and just sort of pointed at everybody who passes by. And there was an incident a couple of years ago where they set up one of these things and called it a pilot. It's just a trial. Yeah. But a guy who'd pulled his hood over his face when he walked past the camera got genuinely arrested.
Yes. Yeah, it's just a trial, though. I mean, Big Brother Watch, if for those who are outside the UK who want to...
Exactly, that's the group.
Big Brother Watch is a fantastic group that is actually holding people accountable, at least bringing these things to the public. I'll also say that the issue often comes down to, if because I work child sexual abuse material, because I worked in this, I get to be the guy who brings up this thing. And I did a talk, Rachel Levinson-Wallman from the Brennan Center and I were doing a talk in Washington. This is like 5 years ago. And somebody said, we were talking about automatic license plate readers or automatic number plate readers. And somebody asked the question like, well, why is it that you can just do this? Like, I think it has a chilling effect on association. Not if a cop is standing on the street corner just writing down license plates and doing it, but if you have a machine that does 3,000 license plates a minute, that is a real chilling effect on association, because I know that if you've got those tools, you can put me together with somebody else and you can draw inferences about me. And, absolutely good point. And I said, that's a really great point. And I would counter that literally this morning. And it just happened to be true that day. Literally this morning, the United States Marshal Service arrested a fugitive of mine who we were looking at for horrendous child sexual abuse material violations in Texas. And they found him using an automatic license plate reader, and they saw him checked into a motel, and they socked him up, and at that moment, he was in jail. So somewhere, we've got to find a difference if that's the continuum. And he said, yeah, but you're the only person with a badge to ever stand on this stage. I'm like, okay, that's a different problem.
But it's about finding a balance, right? I mean, and one of the things, I think the thing you were just saying there about the reader that can do 3,000 plates a minute, I mean, it's a difference of scale.
Yeah.
And as we know from other examples relating to computers and the internet, scale does actually make a difference.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the problem with live facial recognition. All of a sudden, it's not possible. You can no longer trust that you can actually just go out and be anonymous in a large city, which is a lot of people move to large cities because they don't feel watched all the time the way they are in a small village.
Yes. And I think I'm the only person. I mean, there's not a whole lot of cops who are members of EFF and ACLU. I'm no longer an ACLU member. We disagree on some things, but EFF I definitely support. And it's really important to find that balance. But unfortunately, the initial reaction, because, all right, LoveInt is a perfect kind of benign example, right? If I'm a cop and I have access to this computer, the National Crime Information Center, I can actually type in something and I can check out my ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. Right? That is actually a felony. That is actually against the law. Every year, a few cops are hauled out and charged with this. The FBI actually ultimately controls that system. There are faster ways to do it, right? If I run Donald Trump, it's going to set off flags much faster than if I run, Wendy Grossman. But the fact of the matter is, it's against the law, but it happens. And so now the fact that it happens means that every advance in giving officers information is viewed through the lens, the prism of police abuse information systems, therefore they shouldn't have access to them. And from the police's side is, we are here to protect. We should be able to get the intelligence that we need when we are looking for somebody. And until a court tells us not to, we will do everything that we are legally allowed to do in order to have that advantage in serving the community. Assuming, of course, best intentions on both sides of this equation. It's a real problem to get to a middle ground when those are the starting points. But those are, in fact, the starting points in our society, especially when it comes to issues of race and gender. We talked a little bit about traffic violations. I did a study in Texas where I actually got all of the raw traffic data. And if you take an Excel spreadsheet and you sort by race, the first thing that you will come up with is, oh, Black people are being charged more than white people on average, which is true in this town that we did it in. It was very true. Is this because sunglass wearing cops are going around roaming the countryside looking for Black people to pull over and stop and shoot? Or is this something else? And what we came up with was, there's a lot of context that matters. So for example, what time of day did the stop happen? Right? Was it in the middle of the night or was it in the middle of the day? There's different people driving for different reasons during those times. You can't just treat it like it's all the time. Even if you take a look at New York City, the daytime and nighttime population, substantially different. Where did it happen? Was it on an interstate at the northern side of the city, connecting an African-American community on one side to a place where a lot of people work on the other? Or was it in the middle of the city, the town square? There's a difference between those two different kinds of traffic. What was the charge? What was the initial stop? And what was the ultimate charge that was given? And when you do that analysis and you take the time to do it, what you find is that well-intentioned but really stupid and racist laws around things like drunk driving and driving without a license are creating situations that remove the ability to use discretion from police. If I, you know, when I looked at it, those fees and fines that were higher for Black people, the most common reason for the stop was speed across races. The second, so if they got 2 tickets on that same stop, the most common second ticket for a white person was an equipment violation, like a broken taillight, a broken headlight, a missing license plate. Those can be fixed for $10. All you have to do is fix it, come back within 10 days and pay an administrative fee. But if the second ticket is driving while license is suspended, now it's hundreds of dollars of fine and probably going to jail. And that law was passed because people were driving with their license suspended and getting into wrecks, and then insurance companies wouldn't say no. But the problem is this is a regressive law, because who is likely to be speeding and having a suspended license? The poor, the working poor, who are trying to be honest and doing 3 jobs and speeding between the jobs to get to where they're going. They are the ones being punished by this. And so it just requires digging down into the nuance, and nobody has time for the nuance.
Well, back to the license plate readers, that became a problem for EFF and other groups when it was taken out of the police environment. A lot of companies were buying the data from different agencies and using it for completely different purposes,
Yes.
selling that
Repo
data.
companies.
And that's a problem. And you see that happening with all sorts of technology. The original intent is good, but invariably some big bucks company comes in and says, hey, I'll give you a bunch of money if you give me the data.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Just to clarify,
Deal with law enforcement and then keeping that kind of thing from happening.
yes, it is not legal in most places in the United States for a law enforcement agency to sell that data, or basically any other data that they have. But what was happening was law enforcement agencies, when ALPRs or ANPRs come out, these were typically sold as a perpetual software license with hardware that you had to buy to the agencies. And the agencies found that this was incredibly useful technology, but so expensive that they couldn't do it. This was changed by the biggest change here was a company called Vigilant, which I believe is now owned by Motorola. And that was software as a service, or ALPR as a service, where a private corporation was renting you the cameras to put on the back of your cars and the upload and the process, and then they would do the correlation and give you the answers. And law enforcement found that that was much easier to go with operational expense, not capital expense, and they were able to get better service because as a large private SaaS company, they could do things that cops just couldn't do. The problem is that it's owned by a private company, which does sell that data. So who buys it? Insurance companies buy it to find out where you are. Repo companies buy it to get your car. Where's the last time I saw it? Private investigators buy it. It's a real privacy nightmare that, as you say, started with good intentions and started with, in my view, a very, very useful law enforcement tool that has been at this point subverted into essentially just another pervasive surveillance tool.
It's amusing to me to think that I'm a longtime member of the Association of British Science Writers, and they used to do trips to research institutions and talk to, in the days when scientists were not as approachable as they are now.
Yes.
And in 91 or 92, I was taken on one of these trips to Roke Manor Research, which is where I actually saw an early demonstration of auto. They were very proud of it. They had just gotten it working, I think, and they showed us this system for recognizing number plates. And the next time I heard of it, it was being installed in London for the congestion charge.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, what you mentioned the Met before, and I will say this: I did some looking into. There was maybe 5 years ago, there was a big story about how use of force by the Met was absolutely biased against Black people, and I mean, on the face of it, it sounded really terrible. There's a wonderful book called "Wasting Police Time" by a former constable who's left the UK and now is in the United States. Absolutely hilarious. But what he talks about is the amount of data that he had to collect. And he goes through all the different forms that he had to fill out for an 11-year-old kicking a fence and breaking a piece of it. And so I was really expecting, when I saw this analysis, to get a lot of really great contextual data, because that's really what I focused on in the later part of my law enforcement career. And I wrote a book about this. Like, the data that we have is really interesting. And so I said, well, right now, all I'm seeing in the published report is the age of the person against whom force was used, their race, and the race of the officer who used force, and the location and the time. That was it. I'm like, okay, I have some questions. How did the police get there? Did someone call them, or did they just happen to walk by and stick their fat cop nose into something? Did the person against whom force was used use force against anyone before the police used force? Had they injured anyone? Had they killed anyone? Right? Why was this use of force? Why did it happen? And that's the part that they couldn't answer. So when we talk about pilot programs of facial recognition in the Met, I'm comfortable to say that the Met doesn't know what's in that data, because they don't know how to exploit the data that they've captured. They wanted $200,000 to answer my questions, because the way the systems work, they couldn't actually tie the use of force to the actual incident without manual intervention.
You know, it's funny that we're having this conversation, because I don't know if you know that last night a video started making the rounds on social media of police in Manchester kicking somebody in the head.
No, I did not see that.
And some context has emerged where apparently there was already kind of a scrum going on, and one of the female police officer had her nose broken and various things. But the general feeling is, yeah, you still should, you know, once you've got somebody under control, you really shouldn't be kicking them in the head.
Actually, once you've got somebody under control, it's against the law, and you should go to prison if you kick them in the head. See Floyd, George, and other. There are real problems with, and I believe, by the way, having looked at deadly force use since 2014 as in a very detailed way, the problem isn't actually in the use of deadly force in the United States. Every cop knows, and if you look at the statistics over the past 15 years, you will see that every year 1,400 people die after an encounter with police. There are 80 million encounters in the United States between police and citizens, and every year 1,400 people end up dead. Some of them are unarmed, usually about 150 to 200. The rest of them are either armed or something. Even the the Washington Post says that 92% of the people who were killed by police had initiated a deadly force encounter. But that every cop knows that if you shoot somebody, you're going to absolutely get investigated. You probably are going to be the subject of a federal civil rights lawsuit. It's going to be a nightmare for years and years. Actually, non-deadly force is the problem. The slap, the kick, the punch, the humiliation, the ordering people to do stuff that is unfair, talking to people rudely. These are the things that destroy trust in law enforcement of the community. And there's no data anywhere in the world, anywhere about that.
That's really interesting. You know, before Elon Musk took it over, Twitter somehow I found myself reading a lot of things. Black Twitter was a real thing.
Yep.
And one of the things I learned in the course of several years was that if a Black person is present in the United States, you should not call the police, because it's entirely likely that the Black person will end up dead. Now, that may not be true, but that is the lesson that I got from reading people's comments. And that's a pretty scary thing.
Well, it is. If it were true, it would be even scarier. I don't believe for 1 second that anybody is lying about the fear. and that there are reasons for this fear. And in many personal observations made either while on or off duty, in the thick of things or not, I have seen with my own eyes the kinds of things that would make any reasonable, rational person believe that they are being discriminated against. And in many cases they are. So I'm not going to tell you that they should feel safe. And we take a look at the most recent thing when a woman called 911, the cop showed up in her house and they ended up shooting her. Now, she did have a pot of boiling water. She didn't put it down when she was told over and over. She was walking towards but come on, like, these are terrifying things. And I can understand that. If you take a look at the numbers of actual people who die after a police encounter, these numbers are very small as a percentage, even as a raw number in a nation of 350 million. To say 1,400 people die every year across the entire United States, that is actually a small raw number as well as percentage. And the racial breakdown of those people, it is not like, for example, there were 153 people unarmed people killed by police in 2015, which is the year, or 2016, the year that I was researching. That's 153 people. That's not 153 Black people. It's 153 people who were unarmed. And I'm focusing on the unarmed because that's the most likely place to find unjustified use of deadly force. The numbers are actually small. The impact of fear and the impact of what I mentioned before, which is non-deadly force, intimidation, physical violence, physical bullying, that's what creates this terrible fear, with the extra bonus of, oh, and they can also kill you because they have guns. But it's a very nuanced conversation, and there's a lot of bad information out there. A lot of innumerate journalists did the sort by race and came up with some ideas. Black person is 7 times more likely to be shot by police than a white person, which was ProPublica, which there's a big denominator problem there. It implies that I am as likely as a police officer to shoot the guy selling me coffee in the morning as I am the fleeing felon. And that's clearly not true. So there's other things than race involved, but I'm certainly not going to say everything is good, because it isn't.
I was going to ask, you said 1,400 people a year get shot.
About.
Oh,
no, not shot.
What percentage how many interactions do the police have with the public in a year?
It's between 40 and 80 million.
Okay.
Any year.
Because that's probably a fairer comparison than the 350 million population.
Yeah. And again, I think there's two things. First of all, it's not 1,400 people shot. It's usually about half who are shot. Many of these cases are what I refer to as police attended deaths. I'll give you an example. I get a call that somebody is smashing windows. He's naked, running down the street, and he's getting in the way of cars, and several people call 911. And I get a description of the person, and he is a whatever, white or black male, this or that age, naked, running down the street. And I arrive on scene and I see this person who is actually doing these things. And we go up and try to talk to him, and he's naked, so he doesn't have a weapon. And so we're just like trying to talk. Maybe a taser comes out, maybe pepper spray, whatever it is. Come on, let's just talk about this. And that person decides to fight. And now you've got a fight, and they finally get put into handcuffs, and they get thrown into the back of a police car, and then they have a heart attack. That is a police death, right? That is a person who has died after a police encounter, and it should be counted and it should be looked at, but it's not a shooting. And so I think a lot of people immediately leap to shooting. I will tell you that 52% of the number that we looked at were suffering from mental illness, physical handicap, drug addiction, or a combination of those things. And so that's not being addressed, right? But boy, would that be an easy cohort to go after. Like, hey, let's just go after the people who are actually diagnosed with a mental illness, and let's get the cops better. Some states try this. Texas is one. Tennessee is one. Many states don't. They say, well, we're not social workers.
One of the problems.
I'm sorry, Scoop.
One of the problems in Texas has been deaths in custody after they've been, detained, arrested,
Yeah.
And when the person dies before they've been taken into the jail, say they die in the back of the police car, it's been a policy to not really release any of that information to the public because they hadn't really been formally charged. So we had a lot of, people complaining that, their son, their daughter, their their father died in custody, and they can't get any information, no video, no anything, because the person wasn't considered totally arrested until he got to the station. And
So there's a few things that raises that are all of them very important. The first one is as soon as the handcuffs are on, you're my responsibility. And there's a moment that happens on the police radio when I get in, and once those cuffs are on, and I give the code for cuffs are on, that person is now my problem. Until they're dropped at the jail. The jail is often the jail is sometimes run by municipalities, but the main job of the sheriff is custodian of the county's prisoners. And so once they get into the county jail, it's absolutely not a police problem anymore. It is a corrections problem. But I don't mean to go down that particular rabbit hole, but I will say Texas has been excellent, absolutely excellent at making public the use of deadly force by police officers. They have a tremendously good database of that. That is public record. What you're talking about would not fall into that. Another huge problem that we have here is and this I believe is a scandal across the United States. There are almost no standards for a medical examiner. They do not have to be a doctor. The medical examiner, the coroner, the quality of coroner reports changes town to town. There's 2,500 municipalities in Texas, and each one has its own medical examiner, and you never know what you're going to get. This is Christmas morning excitement. I'm going to get this report, and then it comes out with nothing. So until we can standardize, for example, here's an example of nationally standardized data in the United States is 911 callers. It just works out that way, that there is a standard. So when you call 911, they're going to say, what's your name? What's your telephone number? Who are you talking about? Describe the person. What are they wearing? How old are they? How tall are they, right? This stuff you can count on. You might not always have the data, but those questions are always asked. Whereas with the coroner, you really don't have any way of telling. There are also huge controversies around causes of death. Excited delirium is one. It's not necessarily, you're not going to find it in the DSM, but it's a frequently listed cause of death, almost always after somebody was tasered. It's hard to make these policies on a way. Texas has tried with the Sandra Bland Act. Sandra Bland was a young Black woman who was wrongly arrested by a Texas state trooper, yelled at, screamed at, and then brought to jail. The trooper didn't actually kill her. He was, thank goodness, fired. And I had the pleasure of sitting in a room with 6 or 7 Texas state troopers watching that video and watching their reactions to it, because everything he did was wrong. But that's not why she died. She died in the jail because of neglect to follow some basic human and humane policies. And they asked her, do you have any mental issues? And she said, yes, I have attempted suicide. But they didn't put her on a special watch. Sandra Bland Act does a number of things, including making those agencies and those jails responsible for that. And you've seen tremendous work on that in Texas, because Texas, if you have a mental illness in Texas, you are almost certainly going to end up in a jail psychiatric ward, not an actual psychiatric hospital. So Sandra Bland upped the stakes. It also required every Texas police officer, including me, to go 40 hours of mental health certification so that we actually understood. And Texas is one of the few states to actually do that. So yeah,
I'm glad to hear that Texas is doing something right for a change.
Look, and don't get me wrong, they have made many things that are just absolutely off the charts, cuckoo bananas. But they do seem to come up with some pretty good. For example, a domestic. If you ever were my roommate for the rest of our lives, you are a domestic partner, and it's domestic violence if we get into a fight. Texas, bizarrely, which won't fund anything, funds victim services to a really interesting level. The child services is really well funded. There's no way to tell what's going to be good and what's going to be bad in Texas.
Well, I wonder, I often hear people say that police training has become more like military training, that there's a militarization of the police. Is that Is that true? Is that accurate? Is that part of the problem?
Um, there is, I'll start by saying that there is definitely a police militarization problem that needs to be looked at. Radley Balco's book on this is excellent. He is an ordinarily very objective journalist. I think that he's kind of in the bag for the yes, they're too militarized, but you know what? You can be forgiven for that. I don't believe that it comes from the police academy. I will tell you that, you know, there's a real problem going through basic training in the police academy. You're trying to get people within a 6-month period to go from no knowledge at all to an encyclopedic understanding of the law, the ability to use some discretion, and the ability to defend yourself. And the defend yourself thing becomes difficult because most of the training for physical stuff with cops comes down to, here's what happened to this guy when he didn't pay attention. Here's what happened to this cop when he didn't search for weapons. Here's what happened to this cop when he didn't know Spanish and the guys he pulled over were talking about, you know, you go high, I'll go low, and like we'll get his gun. Like, and he didn't understand. So if you sit through 2 months of videos that are all body cam or dash cam videos of officers getting killed, you come out of the police academy with a definite us versus them scenario. Ironically, the people who are least susceptible to that are military veterans. Military veterans who've seen combat are the least likely to use force because they understand what it means. They also understand, I think that a lot of times we tell cops, and this is a finding in our book, we tell cops, you're not paid to fight. The hell you're not. The hell you're not. If somebody is doing something where you can stop him by giving them a smack in the face and getting them in handcuffs so that they'll stop hurting somebody else, my God, that's a better outcome than a gun. Sometimes when you're attacked as a cop, somebody pushes you, and this has happened to me, somebody's pushed me, and I simply dominate the situation, grab them, turn them around, and handcuff them. I'm not reaching for a tool because I'm not that afraid of getting punched in the face. A lot of younger cops are. A lot of the sort of helicopter parenting has made it that kids don't have as many fights as they used to in preschool, kindergarten, in early grades. They're really scared, and they actually legitimately fear for their life when they're hit in the face. Oh my God, he's going to kill me. And so there's this tendency to escalate to a deadly weapon. And that
You know,
is
in most contexts, we actually think kids not fighting in school is a good thing.
I'm not denying that. I'm simply saying we've created a situation in which this generation of law enforcement officers is coming from a position where a fight is actually the scariest thing that they can imagine on any given day.
That's amazing.
So they just need, but weirdly, I do believe that inherent bias training is, well, bullshit. I think that frequent, so mental health training and re-upping on that, I think is really, really important. I think that frequent physical training, hand-to-hand combat, not escalating, but just hand-to-hand combat. How do you dominate a situation? Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga. How do you use your opponent's energy against them to tire them out and get them under control? That kind of training is something that we really need. Try getting the community to vote for that after a cop has shot somebody. It's not going to happen.
I find that really fascinating. I mean, you know, I live outside the United States, obviously. I think you do too, don't you? A lot of the
Now
time?
I do, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember when the internet thing of swatting came up, where somebody deciding to be a jerk calls in, you know, oh my God, there's a hostage at this house, and they have a weapon, and then the police send a SWAT team and people end up dead.
Rarely, but it happens.
All the rarely, but you know, it was always fascinating to read the American and British commentary, because the American commentary would be like, this shouldn't happen, there should be a law against swatting, and all the British people would be going, why are the police armed so much that they can just go in and kill people?
Yes. On the other hand, we had a situation in our agency. Am I allowed to say any of this? It is, I can tell you that there are episodes of swatting that are being done by British teenagers who are safe in the knowledge that the UK law does not permit anything serious to happen with it, and they won't extradite. And so we had there are many instances of elementary schools, middle schools being swatted in highly realistic ways, and police showing up. That to me, that is actually trying to get the police to use force. To me, that is an absolutely terrifying thing. I was very pleased about 3 weeks ago. I got a call from a friend of a colleague who said that they were being swatted because somebody wanted to get their ex username, and we will swat you until you give up your username. And they did call the police, and the SWAT team did roll, and they came, and they really quickly figured out that this was a swatting incident. And when I called to check up at the friend of a colleague was like, did they really take note? And I said, give me the case number, because I happen to know somebody who worked in that department. And I said, give me the case number and I'll check it out. And I called them up, and the response that I got back was, yeah, so this is swatting. I hate those people. I can't believe that they do that. I can tell you that every procedure that we have was followed, from letting dispatch know that there's a note on the address that if this ever happens, that police, they have to go. There's a responsibility to go, but that they will go with the notice that this has been a swatted address before, so that they will be a little bit more available to understand alternate circumstances from the ones that they think that they're there for. That's about the best that police can do. Why are they armed to go to that? They're armed for everything. They're armed for everything.
The arming of police became a real issue. If you recall the notorious incident where a couple of heavily armed, in full body armor
in LA,
bank robbers came into a bank in LA, and the police were totally outgunned. It was a horrifying, firefight there on the streets of LA. And after that, the use of automatic weapons became something that the police had to have, because they were the only ones that weren't being armed like that.
So let me just push back just a little bit, because, please forgive pedantry, but in the United States, this is a very hot button issue. Almost no police have automatic weapons. There are a few, typically in SWAT. There will be some fugitive task forces. Some of those officers will have it, but it is very, very rare to have a fully automatic weapon of any kind. We do have AR-15s, which are semi-automatic. I understand that this is a distinction for some without a difference, but there is under the law. It does look like a military weapon. It is not a military weapon because it doesn't have a burst fire. But yeah, it's a very scary gun, and it has a large magazine that can do a lot of damage. But you're right that was the fulcrum. That was the pivotal point in American law enforcement. This debate had roiled for years throughout the 1980s when crack came up, especially in New York City. NYPD officers had I believe a 6-shot Colt revolver, and we started to see 9mm semi-automatic handguns with 11-round, 12-round magazines, and the NYPD was saying that they were hopelessly outgunned. It wasn't until the very late 80s, early 90s when they started to getting semi-automatic pistols. Partly, weirdly, just because of gun control. The New York City Council, in its wisdom, when Glock handguns came out, which are made of polymer, they immediately said, oh my God, those could go through a metal detector undetected, and they outlawed them.
Can I ask a technical question here?
Yes.
What is the difference between an automatic weapon and a semi-automatic weapon?
Wonderful. An automatic weapon means that when you depress the trigger, the bullets will come out of the gun automatically without doing anything else until you let go of the trigger. So everything you've ever seen in a movie when a gun goes brrr, that's an automatic weapon. A semi-automatic weapon is one bullet per trigger press. Now, the reason that AR-15s and semi-automatic pistols are of such concern to people on the gun control side of this debate is that you can very quickly fire a lot of rounds with a semi-automatic rifle or handgun that can do tremendous damage.
So is it like if it were a car, an automatic weapon is would it be like a handgun is manual shift and or just power assist?
I know what you're saying. It's
Yeah.
something like that. So a revolver, which is the thing that we know where there's the circle thing and it spins around as you pull the triggers, as you pull the trigger, that would be a very it's non-automatic, right? It's a mechanical action which moves the cylinder which contains each bullet, and every time it moves and the hammer hits the bullet in the cylinder, it will fire. A semi-automatic pistol has a magazine where the bullets are simply stacked up with a spring-fed action. And as you pull the trigger, the bullet fires, the actual force of the bullet exploding forces the slide back, which ejects the spent round and picks up another round from the magazine on the way forward.
So it's a little like the difference between a film camera and a digital camera where you don't have to reload.
Yes, that's exactly. It's less about capacity and more about the action that makes the bullets fire.
That's really helpful. No one's ever explained it. They just assume you have some idea what it means.
They do, and I will actually tell you that part of the problem with the gun control debate in the United States is that gun control proponents will often use terminology that is incorrect about what it is that they want to ban. And like there are certain things that everybody says that most Americans agree that, for example, background checks on all gun purchases should be the law. There's very little argument against that. But there's a lot of other things that are not that simple to describe. And so if you say that you want to ban automatic weapons, a gun proponent will say automatic weapons have been banned in the United States since the 1930s. What new law do you want to have? Because it is already illegal to have that gun. And then you end up but it's bad. No, it isn't. And so it devolves again from nuance to talking points.
We've got almost 10 minutes left here, and Wendy had mentioned that the two of you had talked about this assassination attempt on Donald Trump where somebody shot the top of his ear off, though it's miraculously grown back.
Actually, we don't know. We don't actually know what his injuries were because we haven't really had a proper doctor's report on it, have we?
Well, he said somebody said the top of his ear was shot off, but I've seen pictures of him.
So
anyway, but I'm just wondering what you guys were discussing. What do you think about that?
I think that we weren't actually discussing the Trump assassination attempt.
No, we were talking about CrowdStrike because Nick works in cybersecurity.
Okay.
But I would be interested in hearing Nick's impression of the Trump attempt.
Well, I mean,
I
honestly, I have never worked a presidential detail. I have done personal protective details. I have some training. I will say that the things that are under investigation, you're going to hate this answer. The things that are under investigation, why was the perimeter drawn the way it was? Why was the resourcing done the way it was? That kind of stuff is absolutely being handled in the correct way. The people are asking exactly the right questions. I think that it was quite astonishingly comforting to see the way they reacted once they understood what was happening and the immediate covering of former President Trump. And there were questions. So I was taught in my, remember, I've never done a presidential detail, but in my training, it was like the technical term is unass the area, right? You something like this happens, you want to leave immediately. Just get your ass and the protectee out of there. So it was surprising to me because I was watching on television. So I didn't see that there was a shootout going on with the shooter. I didn't see a lot of things, but we could hear them, which was really wonderful because on the ground they were doing everything right. And they were communicating the way they should. They were not panicking the way you would expect them to not panic as professionals. They really had it. They were just running things the way they should be. I talked to two friends who worked on presidential details, and they pointed out two things of why the delay down there. Number one was, we don't know if there's another shooter. We want to wait until we get the all clear. Number two was really interesting to me that from President Reagan's attempted assassination, when Reagan was hit, he was in the car before anybody realized that he was hit. And this was a pivotal moment in the history of protection. It's like, you can't always judge whether the person knows they've been shot. And the line that I heard from my friend on the detail was, you can be certain that there were aggressive cognitive and physical checks going on in that scrum underneath there to make sure, because he held his ear. So it's above the neck, and like, that's something that we need to look at. And then the last one was, there was some criticism around why did they let him get his shoes? And what he said, wait, let me get my shoes. Let me pump my fist. By the way, talk about an inspired moment of political dexterity, right? I mean, like, that was the right thing to do. But why did they let him do that? And the answer came back.
Why wasn't he wearing his shoes?
No, he was. It's really weird. Car accidents and other things like that, the shoes always come off. It's absolutely amazing. It's like, if you go to the scene of a car accident where a pedestrian's been killed, you will find their shoes on the road. It's absolutely amazing. But my friend, he's like, yes, I would like to pick him up and make him not get his shoes when you're 10 miles away in the hospital getting checked out. So that's not a small man. And I didn't happen to see any Clydesdales on that detail. Like, at some point, you're going to have to give in. So that's about
how you going to stop him?
Yeah.
Well,
a criticism of what they did.
One other question I have is, there's a common argument that this was some kind of false flag operation, and I'm wondering if you think that's credible or not. I don't think it is.
Typically, when I find people in government, people I work with in government, talking to me about conspiracy theories and false flag theories, I say, well, you've got 20, 30 years in government. What is our capacity to conceive and execute on a conspiracy to not let people know the real truth? How good are we at that? It's like, yeah, that's pretty bad. I don't know. I think incompetence rules.
Well, not just that. I mean, think about it. You're Trump. Are you going to take a chance that the guy is going to miss?
I don't know. I have talked to somebody who worked on a Trump detail, and what they said was, those rallies are utter chaos, and he is going to do what he wants. And you saw, I would say that he endangered himself by giving the fist pump. That is a photograph that will go down in American history as among the most influential moments. And his instinct was 100% right to do that. So would he? I don't know, but I think if he thought that it was the right thing to do, he would do it.
In 5 minutes, do you think we can talk about CrowdStrike? I realized that we got through the whole conversation pretty much and never got there.
I mean, we can. So at a basic level, there was an update for the software. What the software does is it helps organizations protect against more advanced threats. It's essentially, CrowdStrike is one of the tools called EDR that is the next generation of antivirus. So if you are a corporation or an organization that's large and you face sophisticated threats, which could be viruses, but it also could be intentional industrial espionage or nation state espionage to steal your secrets, your intellectual property. CrowdStrike is one of the leading brands, if not the leading brand, that you would want to put in. It should be part of a layered defense. It should be part of a layered information security plan. And it is because it is this kind of software, it must be rather regularly updated to be able to detect the most recent threats. And as part of any software update process, it goes through things like unit testing to make sure that the features are working, and integration testing to make sure that it sits with the rest of the stack, and things like vulnerability assessment testing. So companies like Sneak make tools to see and to help companies avoid becoming a supply chain risk, a software supply chain risk. And part of that process of quality control testing failed during this update, and for a little bit more than an hour on a Friday morning, or late Thursday night, early Friday morning, an update that contained something that would make Windows machines not be able to start was pushed out to about 8 million computers. And those computers, ironically, are the ones that are trying as hard as they can to stay up on the latest patching and not wait at all and just get it out there. Those are the ones that got hit. An hour later, they found the problem and stopped the update from going out, which is why this wasn't more widespread. But the damage that we saw was those kinds of customers who tend to update tend to be in high risk industries like aviation, healthcare, places where they can't afford to have something go down. This became a supply chain risk. It wasn't an attack like the earlier one with Mandiant EDR against SolarWinds, which was a Russian operation. But in this case, it was a self-inflicted foot wound by the vendor, not being detected and not being stopped by Windows, and Windows and that vendor together did what we call a blue screen of death, and you just couldn't start the machine until you did some very manual processes to remove the bad file and start it again. Hope that's it.
So did the update cause the machine to reboot automatically? Is that what it was?
Typically, yes.
And then the boot failed?
Yeah, the boot would go into the blue screen of death.
Yeah. And it wasn't Microsoft's fault. It was CrowdStrike, right?
No, I mean, well, so there's proximate causes and then there's root causes. And Microsoft has oscillated over the last couple of decades between very reliable and very unreliable, very monolithic and very distributed. And I would say that there is some culpability in the resilience of Microsoft Windows. But no, I don't think that Microsoft Windows was the root cause, but it certainly contributed, and it made things worse, and it made fixing it worse. My issue is really messaging. Oh, go ahead, Mandy. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say thanks very much for the, well, actually for this whole interview. We have actually got to the end of the hour, and it is time to stop, but this has been so fantastic. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks, Nick. That was
And we look forward to talking to you again sometime. Yeah.
Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.
You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.